I got a random email maybe 7 or 8 years ago from somebody in Egypt. And it was a picture, a very blurry picture in the dark. And I'm sure you've gotten similar kinds of photos.
That's when I get excited. The worse the photo, the more excited I get.
So this gentleman sends me a photo of a Rolex Submariner from 1958. First, of course, I'm worried about scams, so I asked for different images, which they took immediately, but still not the kind of quality that I would ideally like to see in order to make a purchase. But it became apparent to me that this was this incredible, untouched, unused Rolex 5508 from 1958 sitting in a drawer. And I really, really wanted it.
Welcome to the Culture Lounge podcast from Assouline, a curated sonic experience that brings together artists, visionaries, and tastemakers in conversation from around the world. I'm your curator, Alex Assouline. Today, we'll delve into the world of watches with the head of watches at Sotheby's, Geoff Hess, and vintage watch specialist, Mike Nouveau. Geoff and Mike are both passionate about watches and creating community around them. Geoff founded RollieFest, an event where the world's premier collectors and dealers come together. And Mike's signature watch spotting videos on TikTok have attracted millions of viewers around the world. I know Geoff and Mike will have a lot to talk about. And now, let's enter the Culture Lounge.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Geoff?
Good. What are you wearing today?
I have my Patek Philippe Calatrava reference 96 in steel from 1941.
Wow, nice.
Yeah. What about you?
I'm a little less traditional today. I'm wearing an unusual piece from Hermes.
Okay.
It's a piece made in 24 individual pieces from about 2 years ago. It's a hand-painted, it's called Les Folies du Ciel, the follies of the sky. It has a bird and some hot air balloons that spin, something a little off the beaten path.
Very cool. Nice choice.
Yeah, I start to take, trips down memory lane, and I think about watches that I've owned in the past, and you always start thinking about where did it really all start? Which was the watch that sort of really grabbed your attention?
It was a Rolex GMT Master reference 1675, which was the first watch I became obsessed with. And, I was already fully an adult at that point. I had zero kind of watch culture before that. No one in my family had watches. I didn't grow up with watches. I knew nothing about them until one thing caught my eye. And I basically did almost, I'd say a year of research on this one reference. And then I bought one. And the timing was pretty good because the market hadn't really gone as nuts for vintage Rolex. I mean, it was still a very, very big purchase, but it wasn't like it is today. But I'm pretty rare in that I really have zero reference points for watches before I took a deliberate step in to the watch world.
I would actually say the same thing on multiple levels. I wish I could say that my father was a big collector and he showed me his watches. It's really just something I discovered on my own. The watch that really put me down the rabbit hole, I think about also a vintage Rolex. There was a screw pusher 6263 vintage Daytona, a Paul Newman dial, that I remember catching my eye, 15 years ago. It was made late 60s, maybe 1970. And I just remember being so fascinated about that watch and the different iterations of the dials and the bezels. And that was my first delve into watch scholarship, almost like watch history or art history. And it wasn't just, wow, I like the look of that watch, so cool. I actually started really learning about watches. And some people that are not in the watch world, you'll laugh about this, and as will you, the accessories that it came with. The gentleman who bought the watch, who was the original owner, he had bought the watch in England. He literally saw it in a store window. And he saved everything, including the purchase receipt. I remember the store was called Sackwee and Lawrence in England, and he even saved the shopping bag.
Wow.
So only a crazy watch collector would get excited by a 5-cent, 50-year-old crumbled up shopping bag, and just the notion of it being so original, so complete, so untouched was really exciting. Yeah. And I definitely, when we talk about rabbit holes and beginning a long journey and all the joys that came with it, I look to that watch.
Wow. I mean, that's a crazy place to start. That's like starting on the top of Mount Everest. I think if I had started there, I wouldn't have gotten very far. It would have stayed a dream. But that's funny with the shopping bag. I mean, I guess can you really call it a full set if it doesn't have the original shopping bag?
Got to have the bag.
It's pretty amazing.
Yep. Yeah. But in truth, I think that for years, collectors struggled with finding an equilibrium between passion and investment. And I remember when I first started collecting, it was all about passion. If you even said the word investment, you got a slap on the wrist. And people said that was a taboo word. Just buy what you love. You got to just stay that course. Buy from passion and ignore the money. I think in time, watches got more and more expensive. And then it became a little more rational, a little more reasonable for this notion of investment to permeate the culture of watch collecting. It was fair for a collector to say, hey, is this a good place to put money? And all of a sudden, collectors started to think, geez, I really want to buy what I love, but watches are getting expensive. And I think that was a big driving force in helping to shift people's tastes a bit. There's a deep world of vintage Rolex, for example, among many other brands, where maybe the investment notion is a little bit more compelling. And we continue to see that.
Yeah, I mean, generally a lot of people ask me, in my DMs, what's the best investment? And I typically say, watches are not investments, especially if you're coming from, I've never had a watch before. Let me jump right into the best investment as watch number one. I think that's probably not the best way to look at it. And certainly, a real passionate collector would definitely not approve of that approach. I do think that, it's good for the business, good for the collector community, good for watches, period, that you can generally get most of your money out of these things in case of emergency. So you don't have to view purchasing a $30,000 watch as like a life-changing thing where maybe the money is down the drain. You can kind of, people do view it, I guess, as like putting into a stock or a bond or something.
A colleague of mine once said to me that it's always important when you buy a watch that you own the watch and the watch doesn't own you.
Yes.
I thought it was so interesting. And I think the reality is we're all human beings and we're subject to a lot of normal emotions that come with watch collecting. It feels good to buy a watch for $10,000 and it's suddenly worth $12,000. That
definitely.
Just feels good, even though if you didn't buy it to make $2,000, if most people aren't doing that. If I think about Sotheby's, for example, where I work, in our last auction, we had just over 1,400 registered bidders in our last sale. 1/3 of our buyers, not bidders, were new. Now, why is that? Quite honestly, I think we have to thank people like you who are exposing so many people through social media channels. But also, I think this notion of prices have pulled back and I can focus a little bit more on passion now. I can buy what I love a little bit more safely. It's like treasure hunting.
Definitely.
And I can go treasure hunting with a little bit of a bigger shovel now. And I'm sort of welcoming that pullback. It's introducing new people into our sport, if you will.
I agree. And, you're right. I do a lot of content about auctions, whether it's live auction bidding or auction previews. And a lot of the comments I get from people who are just starting is like, wow, like who can go to these? Is this like invite only? Like, how do you find out about these? I'm like, brother, this is Sotheby's. This is one of the biggest auction houses in the world. Trust me, you can go visit, you can go try the watches on, you can bid. You don't have to be any type of super VIP. These are public auctions. And, I think a lot of people maybe did think there was a barrier of entry to some of these, but 1/3 new bidders that's pretty amazing. Inside the rooms during the auctions, you're friends with half the room. You see who's bidding on what. You're kind of like, like revving each other up. I could see why it makes sense to keep live auctions going.
It's great when I can sit up on that podium and look around the room and see all of my friends and see everybody sort of in their particular state of action with their game face. And then I even remember seeing you and your phone is up and you're taking videos and you had your game face on. There's nothing like being in the auction room and being in that, in essence, concert hall, sharing it with people and seeing big watches sell for a lot of money.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that must be, I can't imagine the pressure you must feel, because I feel pressure walking into the room, especially if I'm planning on filming something that I know is going to be maybe, go crazy in terms of bidding, or if I'm bidding on something myself, I do get nervous and I do tense up.
There are thousands and thousands of watch collectors. Most of them don't get to be in the room.
That's true.
And sit next to somebody who's got a watch at auction and they're worried about how it's going to do. Or I'm bidding on a watch and I'm worried if I'm going to win. Or I'm covering a watch and I want to get the excitement right. Or I'm representing a client and I'm screaming, bidding into the phone. I think that could be a great little documentary someday.
Yeah. Or a TikTok video.
How did that sort of come to be? How did you come to be Mike Nouveau, and what's the secret to your success, do you think?
So, all the watch collectors are on Instagram. TikTok, not so much. I have a lot of friends that were on TikTok that were successful on there doing different types of content, New York City related content, fashion content. They were kind of pushing me to get on there and maybe do some watch stuff. No one really knew me other than, some Instagram followers. And, I was definitely in the watch world, but no one like in other countries would know me. No one in Geneva would not know me. I had no real contacts other than, just buying and selling vintage watches. And so I made one video. The original concept was watch spotting, where you would stop someone on the street and ask them about their watch and they would show you. The very first video I did did well, a few 100,000 views, which even today is difficult sometimes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And I was like, wow. And all my friends who were doing different stuff on TikTok were like, don't get used to this because this is very unusual for this to happen. And the first 30 videos or something were like that. And I wasn't ever even intending on putting my face on there. I was just the one behind the camera. Within a couple of days, people in the comments were like, well, how do we learn about vintage watches? How do you authenticate a vintage watch? What's this vintage watch worth? Like, who can I talk to about buying or selling a watch? I have all these watches from my grandfather I want to sell. All these different people. I'm like, wow, this is really like an unaddressed kind of community here. I mean, immediately I had people messaging me being like, I have these 20 watches my grandfather left me. Can you help me sell them? And it was like a Tiger Eye Day-Date and like a 5510 and like really incredible. I'm like, Jesus, this is week one of me doing this. This is really crazy. I need to start talking to the camera, putting myself on the camera. I wasn't thinking of it like this, but I mean, I need to kind of present myself as an expert and then, see what happens. And that's kind of what I did. It's not so easy to put yourself now. Maybe it's easier, society has kind of accepted it a little bit more, but talking to the camera and putting it online is kind of like, especially after age 30, I was already old in my mind for the platform, is a little nerve wracking. And it's like, you have to get over is this cringy? Is this like, what are people going to think? Like, what are the real people in this business going to think? Like, I'm on here talking, like interviewing somebody about their Seiko, about their Datejust. And luckily it worked out. I got a lot of followers quickly. I expanded the type of content I did from just asking people about their watches on the street to live buying, going to the auctions, reviewing watches. What's the difference between, a manual watch and an automatic watch? Like, what is special about this Cartier? I truly am extremely passionate about this, and people mention that in the comments. This is not something where I'm like, oh, here's a niche, here's something I could do on TikTok that will get a lot of views. Like, I'm truly like psychotically obsessed, and I think it comes off in the videos, and I can really show my expertise in certain markets and certain watches. Obviously, I don't ever like to use the word expert, but I've studied very deeply on certain niche aspects of the business and of collecting watches.
The word that's really coming to mind right now is something I also have thought about, and that's education.
Yes.
And how things have changed. And I think you have really hit a target that was so necessary and at such a right time. When I started collecting, education about watches came from online forums. You could readily assess who are the experts, and here's where I can learn. Mm-hmm. And over the years, there were so many pictures posted and so many discussions that there was virtually no topic you couldn't search. Instagram, I think, has been very beneficial in a lot of ways for the watch world, for the collecting community, for the culture of watch collecting. It has brought people together. Mm-hmm. It has also created a lot of transparency. On any given day, there are thousands and thousands of watches posted on Instagram, and it can reveal flaws in a watch, totally. And sometimes lack of originality, or even in worst cases, fakes.
Mm-hmm. And also, I tell people how much of the business is done on Instagram DM.
100%.
Millions of dollars every day of watch transactions via DM.
It's imperative.
Yeah.
No question. It brings transparency. It reveals issues with watches, and it connects people. You know, I think about it even just sitting here today, we're surrounded by all these incredible books from Assouline. And you know, the books aren't just pictures. They're not just pretty images. It's all the stories and the narrative that's told. And I think that's so similar to watches. I think the reason why people like to share watches in person is because they like to tell the stories and the narratives and the history. And of course, we all have one or two stories about Holy Grail watches or watches that we found. Have you got a story about, that great watch that you found and how it came to you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few. I wish I had more. I mean, a lot of it, luckily, is because of TikTok and Instagram. People kind of send me leads now because they think of me, a certain generation of new collectors think of me as like the go-to like vintage watch guy. So a lot of times if they see something somewhere, they'll kind of give me a lead and tell me, look at this unknown auction, or this store in my town has something. When I got my Cartier Cousin, the bamboo, I got that right on 47th Street in the Diamond District from basically a picker.
Amazing.
Who knew I was into weird Cartier, and that's all he knew that it was kind of a weird Cartier.
Did he call you or you just walked?
Nope. He sent me a message on WhatsApp with just a photo. And he said, "Is this for you?" And I said, I'm looking at it trying to see if it's the men's size or the ladies' size. Both are rare, of course. And it was the men's size. And I was in the middle of eating lunch. I threw my lunch away and I said, "Hold this." And I also said, "Who else did you show this to?"
Yeah.
Because I know he has obviously colleagues on the block who would buy this.
Stop showing it. Stop showing it.
So I said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. So, and I also said, "Can I film this?" He said, "Yes."
How great.
'Cause I knew this was going to make good content, and it did. I mean, I got it for $12,000. Then, last week one sold for almost $100,000, the same watch.
Amazing.
And a lot of people were saying, like, didn't this guy, didn't he see the video? Wasn't he mad? I said, no, not at all. He wasn't mad. He is a professional middleman. He's a picker. He finds stuff. He offers it. He does probably 15 of these deals a day, and that's how he makes his money. He doesn't have it's not his interest to market it, study it, authenticate it, and, he finds one, then he finds the next one. And somebody said, what was his reaction? He said his reaction when he saw this video and he saw how much more is worth, his reaction was, "Let's do more business together."
Isn't that great?
Yeah. And I wasn't buying it to sell anyway. So that also changes the dynamic a little bit. I bought it to keep.
Yeah. There's one story that I think about in my life that is sort of the one that resonates most with me. And it's very consistent with the idea that I love to say that watches don't just tell time, they connect people. I got a random email maybe 7 or 8 years ago from somebody in Egypt, in Alexandria, Egypt. And it was a picture, a very blurry picture in the dark. And I'm sure you've gotten similar kinds of photos.
That's when I get excited. The worse the photo, the more excited I get.
So this gentleman sends me a photo of a Rolex Submariner from 1958. He then explains to me that this was his grandfather's watch. His grandfather passed away. His father basically doesn't speak English, so they wanted to sell it. They live in Alexandria, Egypt. They found my name and a few other names.
Right. That's the worst.
Oh, yeah.
That's the worst.
Big people that you and I both know. And they were sort of wanted to find out, what do they have here? What's it worth, with a view towards we're going to sell this.
Right.
So first, of course, I'm worried about scams, so I asked for different images, which they took immediately, but still not the kind of quality that I would ideally like to see in order to make a purchase. But it became apparent to me that this was this incredible, untouched, unused Rolex 5508 from 1958 sitting in a drawer. And I really, really wanted it. And eventually, I realized I was in a little bit of a bidding war, and I was competing against other people that I knew it would just be very difficult, and I didn't want to be in that position of duking it out. Right. I really just wanted this for myself, not to resell. And I ended up saying to them, look, I'll make you a deal. I'll wire you $10,000 as a show of good faith. And if I end up getting the watch, great, you'll credit me. If not, you'll wire it back to me. I did that, and it was at that point that the son told me that his father said he couldn't believe that there was somebody at the other side of the earth from a different culture who basically speaks a different language that would be willing to send $10,000 like that. And he cut off all bidding and he said, "You've got the watch."
Wow.
They then said, "We've never been to the United States before." So I said, "Look, I don't know anybody in Egypt. I'm a little uncomfortable. Maybe there's a place in sort of more proper Europe we could meet, Greece, something like that, where I have mutual friends I could stay with." And eventually they said, "No, you know what? We have relatives in Atlanta. We'll fly to Atlanta, meet our relatives. It'll be our first trip to the U.S., and then we'll come to New York." That was 8 years ago, and I still remain very, very close friends with them. And the most beautiful part of it is that it was, in essence, a grandson selling me his grandfather's watch. And the watch was everything I had hoped it to be. It was just extraordinary. And my grandfather, who's not with us anymore, grew up in New York and was a fireman. And I gifted this particular person my grandfather's badge from the New York City Fire Department. And it was so nice. We exchanged gifts, in essence, from, paternal grandfathers. And he sent me a picture of my grandfather's badge on the windowsill in Alexandria, Egypt. We remain close friends to this day. And it's the epitome, the essence of this great watch community and the culture that goes with it, that two very diverse cultures could come together because of a relatively meaningless piece of jewelry on our wrist.
That's amazing. That's definitely better than my story.
No. That's just the most
That's an
dramatic.
amazing story.
But,
wow.
Yeah. So
Cool.
Where do you see the culture of watch collecting now, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I think that in terms of vintage, people are going to need to start embracing restoration, probably. Honest restoration. It's accepted in the Patek Philippe vintage community. In the Rolex vintage community, it's certainly not. And, Rolex has this heritage program now where, you ship the watch directly to Geneva. They do, a much deeper restoration. It costs probably 5 figures to do it. The market, I think, hasn't spoken if they'll accept a watch that's gone through that treatment or not. I think as the years pass, we're not going to have much choice but to accept the restoration. It's accepted in the car community, but watches, people still get really nervous about it. There's plenty of, Patek Philippe's of the 40s and 50s were kind of built to be restored and cleaned just by the nature of how they were built. With a normal service back then, Patek Philippe would have cleaned the dial or washed the dial or removed the applied markers and done some cleaning and maybe not even told the client. And, that's accepted within Patek Philippe collectors. But I think with other brands, Rolex especially, we're going to have to figure something out in terms of making new parts, like you see what Greg Petronzi does with True Dome, where he makes replacement crystals for 60s Rolex that are maybe better than the originals.
Well, I agree with you totally. I mean, maybe I'll leave you with one story that you remind me about. Instagram has connected me, as I said, with lots of people from all over the globe who are watch collectors. One such person is a woman living in England whose Instagram handle is Old Watch Lady.
Yes, I know her.
I know her well. As you know, she never reveals her face or name. She came to RollieFest, and I was sitting having breakfast with her the morning of the big event. And as people came over to the table to say, "Hey, Geoff, how are you? It's great to see you," I would always say, "Oh, I don't know if you've met Old Watch Lady. This is her." And eyes lit up, and they said, "Wow, Old Watch Lady, you're a legend."
Yes.
And that was the word used. And I said to her, "Let me tell you why I think they're calling you a legend. Not so much because of the interesting watches that you have, which we all admire, and lots of us have interesting and unique watches, but what you stand for. You are the person that purely buys what they love. You have never, you have somehow have the self-confidence and the security to not be influenced by herd mentality, not to follow the crowd, but just buy what you love." And it was so fascinating for me to see this because it reflected people really saying, "I want to be you."
Yeah.
And maybe I'm not quite strong enough to be you. You're so rare. You're a legend. You buy just what you want. And how do you do it?
Yeah.
And that was so interesting for me.
I agree 100%. She's fascinating. Yeah, I chat with her sometimes.
Yeah.
She has very, very good taste.
Yeah. And again, it's just yet another example of the culture of watches in the community. And I know we see this with other collectibles, with cars and books and art, but it really does connect people. And with somebody like that, this is a woman who's older than me in England, who I'd never otherwise meet or connect with,
Totally.
but for this passion and joy of embracing wristwatches.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
It is.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Culture Lounge. If you want to dive deeper into the world of watches, Assouline has many books to guide your way. Like The Impossible Collection of Watches, The Impossible Collection of Rolex, and The Impossible Collection of Patek Philippe. I'll leave you with a fun bit of trivia I learned from our book, The Impossible Collection of Watches. Did you know that Louis Cartier invented the first wristwatch around 1903? The story is that the Wright brothers, who were American aviation pioneers, would strap a Vacheron Constantin to their thighs while flying. In response, Louis Cartier came up with a more stylish and safe alternative, the wristwatch. In our next chapter, we'll be immersing ourselves in the fashion industry with Linda Fargo and Alina Cho. Subscribe to the Culture Lounge so you don't miss it. For more inspiration, head to assouline.com, where culture means luxury. À bientôt.